Hello and welcome to another Arsecast Extra, as always, with James from Gunnerblog. James, good morning to you.
Good morning, Andrew. How you doing?
I'm all right. I followed up yesterday's game with a Charles Manson documentary just to sort of lift the mood a little bit.
That's nice. Did it work?
Yeah.
I was in the hotel bar last night. I
Yeah.
told you this. I'm still in Manchester, just soaking up basking in the 1-1 draw.
Lucky you.
Leaning out the window, taunting locals. And a point! We've got a point! And a man, very polite, nice man, came up to me in the bar and said how much he enjoyed the Arsecast, and it was very complimentary. And then he said, but I won't be listening tomorrow.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. I completely understand that. I think there will be people who don't feel in the mood to listen to this today. There might be people who leave it a couple of days before they have a listen. And of course, there are the hardcore listeners who, need this to get through what was a disappointing day at Old Trafford yesterday. But look, I get it. It's it all feels like everything is fizzled out, doesn't it? It feels flat, anticlimactic, all of that kind of stuff. So I do get it when people are like, oh, the rest of this season, at least from a league perspective, is going to be just a bit of a chore, a grind that we have to undergo. That's the job. That's what you got to do. But I do get why people might be inclined to listen to something else this morning, or not listen to anything at all. Just switch off the old, what does Tayo call it? The Mugabe media lockdown, after a bad result. So,
yeah. Well, let me kick us off. I was thinking about this. I was sat in Mikel Arteta's press conference yesterday, and I was thinking about how there's that kind of unspoken rule. The first question of the press conference is just sort of a non-question, right? It's just like so what did you think about the football match we all just watched? and I never want to be that guy who asked the first question, because it's like, it's not really a question. You just throw it to Arteta and he gets to say whatever he's prepared to say.
Sure.
But I'm going to play that role now with you and say, Andrew, what's your reaction to that?
Oh, I have to say I was disappointed and ultimately slightly relieved.
Yeah.
Which is a weird place to be in your head, because I think going into this game, listen, I thoroughly enjoyed the 7-1 win over PSV in midweek. I thought it was great. There was a lot to like. Who doesn't love it when your team scores 7 goals? I was not under any illusion that this meant that we were back to our free-flowing best and goals were just going to come willy-nilly, for want of a better way of putting it. I did think this was going to be a difficult game because we saw the issues we have with not just goal scoring, and I'm with you on your question later to Mikel Arteta, and that's maybe something we can chat about. You focus not so much on the lack of a striker, but maybe a lack of creativity from elsewhere, and I think those things are linked, right? The forwards and the creativity, they're inextricably linked for me. So I wasn't expecting us to go and hammer Man United 4-5-0 or anything like that. I thought it was going to be a difficult game. However, I did hope that, given the absolute fucking state of Manchester United at this moment in time, we would have enough to go and win the game, whether it was by a tight margin or whatever. I thought we could win this game. So when you don't win it, and when you're probably a little bit fortunate not to lose it, it's both disappointing and you have this sense of, that could have been actually quite a bit worse. We could be feeling a lot worse than we are this morning. And I think the mood is already a bit low. So, imagine what it would have been like if Bruno Fernandes had scored that goal. Imagine losing in that fucking 93rd minute to a Bruno Fernandes goal. I think I would have just texted you and said, let's just skip this week.
Yeah. I'm sort of with you. The rational part of my brain is like, oh, we kind of got away with that.
Yeah.
Like we very, very nearly lost that game. The emotional part of my brain is really sort of aggrieved and grumpy about it because we've played some bad United teams down the years, over the last decade or so. Nothing, I think, to compare to this one. Like, this is a historically bad Manchester United team.
Sure.
And I have this sense, and listen, it's an emotional reaction. I haven't pored over the results and verified it. But I have this sense as a fan that we have let some pretty bad United teams off the hook. And never more so than yesterday. Like, take the badge out of it, take the history out of it, take the stadium out of it. Arsenal should have been, and to be honest, for long portions of that game were markedly better than that opponent.
Yes, I agree. I agree. I mean, I have to say, in the first half, I was trying to think of an Arsenal performance at Old Trafford that was that dominant in terms of the control we had over the game. I know we're going to talk about, turning that control and dominance into goal-scoring chances and opportunities, but I was really struggling to think of a time that I saw us at Old Trafford completely boss a half of football the way we did in that first half. I think we were energetic, we were lively, we were moving the ball well. We weren't really replete with attacking ideas once we got to their final third, but in terms of where the game was being played, when United got the ball, we'd let them have it for a few scant minutes or seconds and win it back. And you could hear the frustration at Old Trafford. I'm sure, you were there, so you must have been aware of A, how quiet that crowd was at times, and B, the sense of frustration that was there when they did get the ball, they just couldn't hang on to it, and we'd win it back and sort of work our way into that position, let's say 5 to 10 yards outside the Manchester United penalty box, at which point I think the issues that we have discussed or will discuss, were pretty evident. Yeah. That it felt like we needed to be so precise with the final pass, because I think there's a lack of creativity, which I completely agree with. But I think as well, maybe just not quite the right kind of movement for the creativity we have to be unlocked, if that makes sense. So you have this sort of circular thing, as I mentioned before, like the sort of one-touch passing, the intricate passing around the box, those little scoopy passes that we try and play over the top of a team that sits deep as somebody tries to run onto it. It nearly worked once. I think Odegaard scooped one over for Declan Rice, and he just couldn't quite get the ball down to get a shot away, So, I mean, that was as dominant a first half in terms of control, not chances, as I think I've ever seen Arsenal have at Old Trafford in all the years I've been watching Arsenal.
Totally agree. Yeah, it was. I think Mikel Arteta said up until the last 15 to 20 meters.
Yeah,
and I can't argue with that. I think that's true. We were dominant, in every other part of the pitch and very good in those respects. But that last 15 to 20 meters is so crucial. And you touched on those Odegaard sort of chipped passes into the area. I feel they're kind of significant in a way, because to me that is like a move that is going to come off once a season. Do you know what I mean? Like,
sure,
a perfectly weighted dink that lifts over the centre half and finds the run of the attacker. I feel like the success rate of that is so low, understandably.
Yeah.
It's sort of It's an audacious thing to attempt. And yet I feel like when I watch Arsenal at the moment, I'm seeing Odegaard have to pull out that pass or attempt to pull it out 3 or 4 times a game. Yes. And I feel like that's not really a sustainable plan for attack,
No, it's not. It's I'm not going to say it's desperation per se, but I think it is a consequence of being unable to create from other areas, you know? And the low block discussion will come into play, I'm sure, in our struggles against a team that sits deep. And yesterday, I think at the press conference, he said, you know, about Ruben Amorim, that wasn't his plan. It wasn't the plan for Manchester United to play in that low block. I think it was because of the way Arsenal played more than anything else, you know? But that is a consequence of us dominating possession, that the opposition will drop really deep and stay compact and that they're hard to break down. I mean, we saw, was it the Everton game? I think it could have been the Everton game. It was one of those where you're going, oh, God. You know, they just stayed organised and made life really, really difficult for us. So that is an ongoing problem. But how do you view that in terms of, right, a team that decides, right, we are not going to move out of our final third. We're going to sit there in this low block and we are going to deny Arsenal space to find the passes to the attacking players, etc., versus the way we actually play, causing teams to adopt that tactic. Is there anything that we can do differently that sort of makes the game a bit more open? You know, because that control that I talked about is very impressive, but if a consequence of that control is the opposition playing in a way that ultimately is your kryptonite, then is that the right way to play? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It's a double-edged sword. Just quickly on Amorim in United, you know, he came into the press room and said, you know, this isn't the ideal way I want my team to play. I don't want to be in the low block for the whole game, sort of moving forwards. But at the same time, he said, but the strategy worked perfectly on the day. And it becomes a kind of self-fulfilling thing where any team watching Arsenal, particularly a team which Manchester United are at this point in time, in the lower half of the Premier League, are going to look at that and say, well, that's what we need to do. And we're coming up against this more and more and more and more. And in fact, the fact that United and Amorim play with that wing-back system means that essentially they were collapsing into a back five, which we know Arsenal really struggle with. So it wasn't ideal for us. I think over the past few years, Arsenal have sort of steadily shifted up the pitch in terms of where they play. And the benefit of that is that it's moved the entire game away from our goal and has allowed us a degree of kind of control. I know Mikel Arteta doesn't like the word control, but sometimes it is the right word because there is a kind of sterility in it at times. It has brought a control to how we play, but at the same time, it massively reduces the space in which we have to play and create and operate. And there was a time when Arsenal were kind of the ultimate small space team. You know, the archetypal Arsenal player, I wrote about this morning, was that kind of tricky playmaker, a number 10 who was probably playing in another position because we had four of them. Yeah. You all know the types of player I'm talking about. Arshavin, Cazorla, Nasri, you know, Fabregas, Rosicki. You can go Kleb, you can go on and on and on and on and on. And we have, I basically feel that we now don't have enough of those really gifted small space players to play as high up the pitch as we do. Like we create a situation where we will face a low block, but then I'm not sure we have the attackers to unpick that lock.
Completely agree.
Yeah.
Completely agree. Because I think there is obviously a focus on centre forward. There's obviously a focus on the attack and the players that we're missing. And I think we're better with those players. That's pretty obvious. But I still think that if there is a weakness in this Arsenal team, when we have all of those players available to us, it is this kind of game, this kind of scenario, this kind of situation where there isn't enough space to play in. And maybe, you know, as Mikel Arteta and his coaching staff start to think about this season and think about the summer, they've got to they've got to recognize that this is a problem, even when we do have all our attacking players, and maybe they have to try and conjure up a solution via the transfer market, via the tactics board, whatever it might be. But yeah, we just don't have the creativity that we need. I mean, I think there are players capable of creativity, as we saw the other night, for example, against PSV. I thought Leandro Trossard was really good from the left-hand side, that there was a level of creativity from his game which was really, really useful to us in getting goals, but he had a poor game yesterday and didn't really contribute. And then the burden falls on Martin Odegaard and maybe Ethan Nwaneri. And look, we're asking a lot of a 17-year-old who, I think they said yesterday, made his first Premier League start in January, and now, you know, there's a weight of responsibility on him because of what we need from the player in his position. You know, I think he had a tough game yesterday as well. You know, so when it doesn't work on the flanks, the only thing we've got is basically Martin Odegaard. And look, again, I don't want to sort of relitigate this whole thing about the season he's had. He's come out and said he hasn't been good enough this season, and who am I to argue with him? He knows well enough. But the burden of creativity being placed on just one player, you know, that can't be right. Or not even having another option on the bench to come on and add a little bit of creativity in midfield, or even replace Odegaard on a day where maybe it's not quite working for him. Those are the bigger issues for me.
Yeah, and I think the centre forward and the other areas of the attack, you know, the number 8s, the wide players, they all kind of goes hand in hand. You know, they all feed on each other's movement and passing, and it just wasn't quite good enough from Arsenal yesterday. And I think you make a good point about what we had to turn to on the substitutes bench. And I know people will say injuries, and we can't do every podcast about injuries. No. You know, it's definitely a factor. But at the same time, when I look at the likes of Saka and Martinelli, who was back yesterday, albeit off the bench, they can do some of that small space, low block stuff. But I'm not sure it's their best game. Like, I think really at their exhilarating best, it's receiving the ball in space, you know, working in transition and attacking in behind. So I think there is a big stylistic question to answer, which is, if we're going to continue playing as we do, then we need a different profile of attacker, I think. Mm-hmm. And if not, maybe we need to think about how we play, how we set up, how we control space differently to afford us more room, more opportunities in the final third. But I think it's got to be top of Mikel Arteta's to-do list for the summer. And I don't purely mean that in a recruitment sense, but I think in a coaching sense as well. Unlock the low block. Yeah. That is the, you know, it comes in the final part of the pitch, the final third, but I also think it might be the final stage in our evolution if we're to really become a truly, truly elite side that's regularly winning trophies. Yeah. Individual quality, I think, is a key component to that, but that's probably a discussion for another day. You know, we don't need to talk about how, let's say, a player of the profile of Alexis Sanchez with that individual explosiveness and willingness to take a few chances in the final third can get you goals. We've done that, and we'll talk about it more, I'm sure, over the coming months, and certainly over the summer as we learn how this squad is going to be augmented via the transfer market. That, by the way. Yeah, go on. I was really struck. I asked Arteta about Ricardo Calafiori on Friday, and he spoke with real passion and excitement about his attacking ability. I think he spoke about his unpredictability, and he sees things that aren't there, you know, creates chances or attempts at goal, which you look at the game thinking, I don't know how he's going to produce anything there, and he does. And I've never really heard Arteta talk about a player like that before and be sort of captivated by their imagination in that way. And I kind of found it interesting that, like, he talked about a left back in that fashion, And it's a position where, like, he affords a lot of risk and creativity and individual responsibility and invention. But I've never really heard him talk about any of his forwards in that way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I've never heard him say, like, what, you know, they have this capacity to create from nothing. You know, it's always about efficiency. It's always about patterns. So just play Calafiori up front, I guess, is the answer.
Well, listen, we'll eschew the left-back Mikel Arteta jokes as we try and unpack what else happened in this first half, right?
Yes.
So I think there were a couple of moments for Arsenal. There was a Mikel Merino shot. Again, it was nice play on the edge of the box. Some intricate passing, and it opened up for Merino. I think he tried to just pull his shot inside the near post. Perhaps should have gone the other side just to give himself a better chance of hitting the target. But that was an opening, and there was one for Trossard as well, where I think he got a little bit fortunate with his first touch and couldn't quite wrap his foot around the ball. Sort of hit it with the outside of his foot, so it swerved beyond the post rather than curling inside the post. But that was really about it in terms of moments of danger, a couple of corners, which United more or less got clear.
I think, I mean, if Arsenal score one of those chances, if Merino puts that ball in the bottom corner, I don't really have any real doubt that Arsenal win this game.
Sure, me too.
And when you are up against that low block, finding that breakthrough is so essential. So in some ways, like, the second half kind of was its own entity. But for me, I think the real crux of the game was that first half where we had that absolute dominance and yet couldn't convert that into a lead. Because I think if we'd got that lead, there's only one winner from that point on.
No doubt in my mind. I agree with that completely. And again, that will open up the discussion about strikers, forwards, efficiency, taking chances. You know, I don't think it's a terrible miss from Merino, for example, but maybe a more natural centre forward or somebody with greater finishing ability puts that in the back of the net. And then I think it is probably a different game. But then, of course, the half ended in Manchester United scoring a goal. We conceded a free kick in a really dangerous position, which felt like the only way United were really going to score in that first half was maybe a set piece, either from a corner or a free kick. And in Bruno Fernandes, they do have a player capable of scoring from dead ball situations. He's very, very good from free kicks. As much as it pains me to give that man any credit for anything, he is very good from free kicks. There is, of course, a sort of wider discussion about this goal. So there are two things, right? One is the distance of the wall, which looked far away. And actually, the Manchester United players, I think Christian Eriksen was on Sky afterwards having a good laugh about it, that, they couldn't quite believe how far the wall was away. And the other aspect was the positioning of David Raya. Was he too far over to one side? I did wonder if he had Bruno Fernandes' free kick against Everton in his mind.
Perhaps, yeah, where he whipped one.
He whipped one into the keeper's side. Now, I know it's different. I think the only person I've ever really seen score a free kick that way, did David Beckham score one? Was it for England? Or was it for Manchester United? I can't remember. But he had the ability to do that, didn't he? Go over the wall and go the keeper's side and catch the keeper out. I did wonder if that was part of why Raya was where he was positioned. The ball goes in. It's not exactly just inside the post. It's not exactly top corner. And Raya still isn't anywhere near it. So how do you view those two things, the positioning of the keeper and the positioning of the wall? Because I've got some thoughts on the wall.
Yeah, well, with the keeper, I remember hearing once that Arsenal's goalkeeping coach, Iñaki Kanya, is quite prescriptive about positioning on direct free kicks, and he's very strong on the keeper protecting their own side. I'm paraphrasing, but I think effectively he said, if it goes the other side, I can live with it. But if it goes your side, that's a big problem. And I think that the positioning of the Arsenal goalies on direct free kicks consequently has tended, while Inyaki's been at the club, to be quite aggressive to one side. So that might be a factor.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think, a lot of the time keepers are following instruction, and I don't want to put too much of that on the player in this instance. I also think it's a great strike. I remember when Aaron Ramsdale saved that James Maddison free kick at Leicester, and we were all falling over ourselves to say, wow, what a save that is. But it wasn't in the corner of the goal. Like sometimes if a guy gets it up and down and over the wall with pace, it doesn't have to be in the corner to score, which is what I'm coming around to, which is I actually think the wall may be the biggest factor here. Like I think if the wall is in the right place, then they probably block that free kick.
I completely agree. Like, I'm not here to blame Anthony Taylor for our shortcomings. I think we have to take responsibility for our own performance and not making chances in that first half. But for me, it's a very simple explanation, is that when you look at the free kick, and there's a sort of reverse angle, isn't there, where you can see the ball just skim over the head of, I think it's Mikel Merino as he jumps in the wall.
Right.
If that wall is in the right position, if it's 10 yards and not 11.2 yards, then I think it hits somebody's head rather than hits the back of the net. Simple as that. Like maybe it's on us to deal with that situation, to recognize that the referee has put us a bit too far back and do what United did in the second half when we had a free kick, and that's to sort of creep forward, a few inches at a time until you've closed that gap a bit. But ultimately, that was why that free kick went in for me. I think you can ask questions of Raya's positioning for sure, but if that wall was 10 yards away, and by the time Fernandes had taken it, if he started 10 yards away, it would be 9.5 yards or whatever, then it hits the wall. Simple.
Yeah, and I think, look, I know we're no fans of referees, certainly this season, and the referee did move that wall further back. I think someone on that pitch in an Arsenal shirt needs to have that intuition to know this isn't right. And even if it is right, frankly, even if it's 10 yards, let's try and shimmy forward to close it to 9.
Yeah.
Maybe we were a bit naive in that moment and we were punished. And I have to say, as soon as the referee blew for that free kick, I was like, well, it would just be kind of Murphy's Law, wouldn't it, for this to go in. And I went down the tunnel at half time and there was a United fan celebrating just over the tunnel. And he screamed, "We're rubbish, but we're winning!" In a London accent, of course. But I couldn't argue with him. And they found it hilarious, frankly, that they were 1-0 up in that game. Because they knew,
of course,
how badly they'd been sort of dominated.
Yeah, I mean, it's not quite a sucker punch, but like for Arsenal to dominate that half in the way that they did in terms of possession and territory and go in 1-0 down is just typical of the way things have gone for us this season, the way we've struggled against low blocks. And even that, the fact that the referee what's the most basic thing you can do as a referee is just sort of count 10 yards, draw a little line. I didn't really know what he was doing in the second half as well when Arsenal had that free kick in the D. Like, he didn't even seem to draw a line. He sort of drew a kind of semicircle, and I don't know. It was very, very odd.
Here's the thing. I mean, we're talking about it on this free kick because it went in. But what do you reckon the accuracy of those 10-yard walks is in general on a Premier League weekend?
A great question. I don't know. It all depends on the length of the referee's stride, doesn't it? Yeah. Some of them are bigger than others, and I don't really know.
I wonder if that will be a kind of a conversation around technology. The high advanced technology of a tape measure, for example. We can stop the game for VAR for 5 minutes, but we can't actually be bothered to measure 10 yards.
Yeah, that's it. The referee, puts the ball down, hands one end of the tape measure to the guy who's about to take the free kick, and then marches it out and draws the line. I mean, it is.
I'm not kidding,
completely.
Actually, I was watching these direct free kicks yesterday and thinking, these are big stoppages in the game now. Like when those are given, and the whole thing of like pacing out the walk, arguing with the wall, the goalie setting their position. That must be 2 minutes.
Yeah, at least.
So there's got to be a better, more efficient, more accurate way to do it.
We all call for this kind of technology, not realizing that with every new development comes a consequence that we haven't thought of, and somehow it will make football worse. We don't quite know how it's going to happen, but it will definitely happen. Oh.
Yeah, interesting one. Because presumably the accuracy is pretty variable.
It must be completely arbitrary or random, if you were to measure them out. If anybody could be arsed to do that, that's the other part of it.
The Athletic presents our findings. So I've just volunteered myself to count every.
I wish you luck with
10
that
yards.
So
half time, and I bumped into. I saw a couple of United fans in the press room. They were just laughing to themselves, basically, about that first half. It was a bit like, it reminded me of the 2000, not quite, but the 2005 FA Cup final. In terms of like a side that's been completely on the back foot, and yet they're winning.
Yes. So second half, United are a little bit better, I think it's fair to say, and whatever questions people might have about David Raya over the free kick, I think they need to be put to one side for what he did in that second half. The save from Mazraoui, look, it's one of those where it's just complete instinct, isn't it? The way he sticks his foot out and it deflects just wide of the post. That's one of those that could easily have just clipped off his shin and gone in. I think Mazraoui should score there, to be honest. I think it should be 2-0 to Manchester United. Maybe the bigger question is, how do we allow that kind of chance to happen? Because he's basically free at the back post. Yeah.
I think we were more vulnerable in this half than we're accustomed to seeing. I'm just watching the Mazraoui chance and trying to see if there's any indication.
I think it comes from an Arsenal corner
in the second half, which created kind of transition opportunities. I mean, this was a real counter-attack, this one.
Yeah.
And I think that's a brilliant save. Like, I think sometimes saves go under the radar a bit when they're made with the feet rather than the hands.
But
I think it's a brilliant sort of reaction to spread his legs and get that round the post.
Would you be unhappy with an Arsenal player not scoring from that position?
I might be, yeah. I mean, he is a wing back, a defender principally, but so I wouldn't be judging too harshly. But yeah, I think it's a great chance. As was the moment from Xerxes, was it, who had the back flick? I mean, that's a good opportunity, and Raya's in the right place at the right time on that one.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, obviously in stoppage time, he prevents us from.
I mean, that last sort of 10, 15 minutes after we'd scored, we'll come to that maybe. So let's just talk about changes. He took Calafiori and Nwaneri off, put Lewis Skelly and Martinelli on. I think Martinelli was, had a little bit going on. There was one effort, wasn't there, at the near post when he probably should have gone to the far post in terms of his shot, because it could have deflected off a defender and gone in. It was one of those where I think it could easily have been an own goal. I know Trossard was there as well, so maybe that decision wasn't the greatest decision, but there wasn't really a lot going on in terms of chances. And I think I texted you at one point going, I'm really struggling to see where the goal is going to come from. And then it came from Jurrien Timber with some nice work in the Manchester United box. If we're talking about players, with a bit of technical ability, trying something, a little dribble inside the box, opened up the space for him to find Declan Rice. I think the finish is great. Manchester United, the midfield is too deep. Nobody's anywhere near Declan Rice, and the finish is really excellent in off the post. And it's 1-1. What was your thought when it went 1-1?
Well, I mean, I felt like we ought to be in a position to push on and drive home our superiority, really, in that last 20 minutes. United had been on the rack for long periods of the game. I imagine there'd be a bit of fatigue there. They played on Thursday, I think I'm right in saying. And they played on Tuesday.
Yeah.
They had a hard game at Sociedad. So I felt like we had a chance, an opportunity to apply some real pressure and hopefully get the win. But actually, the game became quite stretched, quite chaotic, end-to-end, and the better chances fell their way.
100%. 100%. I felt like in the immediate aftermath of the goal, I felt like, okay, we've scored with 15 minutes to go. United will have recognised that they weren't the best side in the first half. They'll also be conscious of the chances that they missed. In the second half, that Mazraoui one we mentioned, Xerxes, they had opportunities to score a second goal and didn't score that goal. All of a sudden, it's 1-1 with 15 minutes to go. I was expecting more from Arsenal, I have to say. This is the most disappointing aspect of yesterday for me, above and beyond, a first half where we had all that ball and didn't do much with it. I think the fact that I don't know how to explain it, though. I don't really understand how a team that is so assured in possession, so secure in possession for basically all of the game can, in the last 10, 15 minutes, just wobble the way we did. We started giving the ball away. There was just a carelessness in possession where it wasn't even that United upped the intensity. I think we just, I'm not going to say crumbled, but I found it hard to explain why we weren't capable of doing simple, basic things. The Marino error, for example, like, where did that come from? Why did we do that? And we're very thankful, I think, for Declan Rice. If we're talking about David Raya saving our bacon, Declan Rice absolutely did that with a brilliant, brilliant tackle on Højlund. You can make a joke about whether Højlund would have scored or not, given his recent form. But, you put a guy with a clear side of goal with 10 minutes to go because you've made a mistake. I think credit has to go to Rice for that tackle. The timing of it was superb. But those things that allowed Manchester United to have those chances, Gabriel had to defend Højlund at the near post. There's the Fernandes one we mentioned, where Raya gets across, makes a good save, gets up again, claws the ball away. Like, we've seen that more than once from David Raya this season, by the way.
I know. I was thinking this morning that I feel like every month I say, well, if you had to give player of the season now, it'd probably be David Raya. And we're in March now. This is actually getting pretty close to the time when the PFA have their voting for player of the season, or at least used to. I actually think it will take some doing to wrest that off him in what remains of the campaign. Without a league title to play for, I think he might be nailed on. Which, credit to him, he's been fantastic. But I think also kind of tells a bit of a story there too.
Do you think that says something? Arsenal are I think we're kind of a hard team to beat, right? We struggle sometimes to win games that we should, but I think
like a draw.
We like a draw, and generally speaking, we are a hard team to beat. You have your off days here and there, of course, but in general, we are a tough team to beat. But is the sort of defensive prowess that we are renowned for, is that the right way of putting it? Like, we've only lost 3 games this season. Liverpool have lost 1. Behind that, Forest, Chelsea have lost 7 each. Manchester City have lost 9 games. We've only lost 3. So, it is all those draws. We do like a draw. Turn some of those draws into wins, and we're looking at a very different season, right? But is the fact that Raya is potentially one of our players of the season, if not the player of the season, does that say something about the defensive side of our game? Like, you can make the argument, well, your goalkeeper is part of your defense, and if he's really good, then your defense is really good. But if your goalkeeper is called into action quite as much as Raya has been this season, does that speak to something else?
Perhaps. I mean, I think we've still got the best defence in the Premier League this season in terms of goals conceded, albeit we have one more game to play than Liverpool. 24 goals. I certainly remember last season us talking regularly about the fact that David Raya wasn't having to make saves. That we were analysing his game through the prism of coming off his line to collect crosses and what he did on the ball in terms of his distribution, because he was so well protected. I don't think you can say quite the same this season, but yeah, I think he's just made some superb saves. Like, he's made half a dozen brilliant saves this season, which, I'm not sure you could say last. I'm not. I don't know if it's just because my head is so sort of invested in the narrative of this being an attacking issue in the team, but I'm not convinced that there's a huge issue there defensively. I certainly don't want Mikel Arteta to hear us saying that. Do you know what I mean? Don't say it loudly.
Okay.
Anywhere near London Colney.
Exactly. To anyone at Arsenal listening to this podcast, please ignore the last 5 minutes.
Ball, honestly, you'll be straight into the market for a couple of centre backs and a left back. So, yeah, I think we've not been as good generally as we were last season. And I guess, perhaps the defence is part of that. But I still don't think it's the kind of the core issue. No,
I agree. I was just sort of making a talking point. What about Kieran Tierney coming on at left wing ahead of Raheem Sterling?
Really interesting. I'm talking a lot about my experience of the game yesterday, but I guess that's what I went through. But
you're here.
Afterwards, one of the guys who covers United was like, couldn't believe that. He
hasn't watched Raheem Sterling this season.
Well, that's literally it. That's what we said. I was like, I don't think you'll find an Arsenal fan who thought that was the wrong decision. You might find a couple, but it's certainly not something I've seen gain any traction.
No, I think that decision sums up kind of where we are and where we found ourselves after the last two transfer windows.
Yes, that's fair. And you can question that and look at that. But what I'm saying is, I don't think you'll find someone who thought Raheem Sterling would have solved the problem.
No, that's what I mean. I completely understood why. I said it in the blog today. We have Raheem Sterling, who's got over 200 career goals to his name, sitting on the bench, and Kieran Tierney, who's got 13 goals in his entire career, coming on at left wing to try and get us a goal to win a game at Old Trafford.
Yeah.
It says something about Sterling, obviously. It says something about our transfer business, obviously. And it says something about where this team is right now and what we're trying to do or having to do to try and find solutions to the big problem that we've discussed, which is scoring goals.
And the Sterling decision Arsenal got wrong. I remember Mikel Arteta in the press conference afterwards saying, I knew when I spoke to Raheem that we had to sign him. Do you remember that? He was like, the first conversation I had with him, I knew we had to get this guy.
He said something about he wanted to know if he still had the hunger or the desire or what have you, which he may well have. He may well have that desire and hunger. Does he have the ability anymore? That is a very different question. I think the answer is, play it out over the course of this season.
Maybe I guess we should probably do less of our recruitment over the phone. Do you know what I mean? I could do a good phone interview to be a footballer.
I'll give you 110% every game, Gaffer. I'll train like what did Arteta say? I'll train like a dog. I'll train like an animal.
Exactly.
Pick your flavour of dog. I'll train like, what's your favourite dog, Mikel? I'll be that dog for you.
We can all say that. Yeah, it's been a bit of a disaster. I think there's no getting away from it. Sky, I wasn't watching, but apparently made a big fuss about the fact that Sterling wasn't coming on.
It was Neville. It was Gary Neville, actually. They kept cutting to Raheem Sterling, who was sitting there on the bench, sort of looking like, I'm not getting on here. And I guess from his perspective, that's got to be hard to take, hard to stomach. As a professional, you're sitting on the bench, Your team needs a goal. And not for the first time this season, your manager is unwilling to put you on the pitch. And actually, when push comes to shove, he chooses a left back who's on his way out in the summer. I know Sterling's on his way out too. So I get it. But you know, Neville's incredulity at Sterling not being used only illustrated the fact that he has not watched Raheem Sterling this season or not paid attention to what Raheem Sterling has produced on the pitch, because, as you said, I don't think there were too many Arsenal fans who were, you know, perplexed by that decision.
And the interesting thing is, there's not even any antipathy really from Arsenal fans towards Raheem Sterling.
No, I don't. Yeah,
I don't get the sense of everyone's like blaming Sterling or angry at him. I think people are just making a dispassionate assessment based on his contribution thus far.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, what we're seeing on television, I remember it with Joe Cole. I think it was at the Leicester game, like continually talking Raheem Sterling up all game. And it's right that there's respect for what he's achieved in the game. But they are talking about a player that we haven't seen. Like, and I'm not sure that player is there anymore, to be honest.
I don't think so. I think Mikel Arteta knows Raheem Sterling very well. You know, he's not just somebody who was catapulted into Arsenal at the end of the transfer window from his perspective. He's a guy he's had a relationship with for years because of his time at Manchester City and what he did at Manchester City and how Arteta, you know, helped him to deliver at Manchester City. And I think if he believed Raheem Sterling could help us get a goal, he would put him on the pitch. The fact that he doesn't put him on the pitch tells you everything from.
And look, I know that sort of the club perspective will be, well, it was a relatively inexpensive gamble, low salary for a player of that supposed caliber. He was supposed to come in as an alternative to Reece Nelson, and did it really affect to diminish the quality of the squad in any way? But I would say, to me, that's a bit like the focus on the January transfer window, when really it does go back to the summer, I think, and the sort of hierarchy of priorities, and the fact that we got to deadline day and sort of that's what was at our disposal. Like, I wouldn't argue with Arsenal taking that gamble on deadline day, but should they have been in that position, would be my question.
Yes. And the answer is no.
Right.
They should not.
There you go.
They should not. So look, ultimately, as we said, a disappointing day, a disappointing result, but one that I think we, in the cold light of day, have to acknowledge could have been a lot worse. We came away with something when we could easily have come away with nothing. I don't know how much comfort that is to anybody listening this morning, but it is something, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the other question is how much does it matter?
That was, there were quite a few questions about that,
right.
But
and does that impact performance?
I think it does. I think it does matter. I know it doesn't necessarily matter in terms of the title, because pretty much everybody acknowledges that's gone now and has been for some time. So it didn't matter in the context of the title. I think it mattered in the context of, the rivalry or traditional rivalry or history or whatever you want to call it with Manchester United. If you're not going to win the title, you want your small wins along the way, right? So inflicting another defeat on United at Old Trafford would have been something, that we could enjoy. It might be brief. It might not be what everybody wants from the season, but it would have been something to enjoy. And I think it also matters in the context of the top four, because points are valuable. We have 55 points. Nottingham Forest are on 51. It's not like there's a huge gap there. A couple of games can change the complexion of that quite quickly. And I think if we're sitting, for example, this morning on 57 points rather than 55, that also matters in terms of what we've got to do between now and the end of the season. So I know what you're saying about, in the grand scheme of things, does it really matter when it comes to the title? No, it doesn't. But I think you have to be able to look at your season contextually, that it all still matters until there's no more points to play for in its own way. So
I agree with that. I just sort of playing devil's advocate. That said, I do find it odd and slightly hilarious the way the television coverage is sort of desperate to frame it in terms of a title race that has been over for at least a couple of weeks.
We have a question about that, actually.
Okay.
So maybe we'll take a little break here, and we will come back with your questions and more in part 2 right after this. Welcome back to the Arsecast Extra. This is part 2 of the show where we answer the questions that you sent to us on Blue Sky at gunnerblog.bsky.social and also at arseblog.com. Also on the Arseblog Discord chat server, which you get access to if you are an Arseblog member on Patreon. We touched on it right towards the end of the first half there, but we had a couple of questions along the same lines. First one, they're both from Blue Sky. First one from Living Saliba Loca. I like that. He says, morning, gents. What's your take on Arteta walking out of the interview yesterday? Is the pressure building, maybe? And then mudo.bsky.social says, how many times can the league is done be repackaged from Sky? This whole idea that they're just trying to rage bait everybody into, believing Arsenal have blown the title today against Manchester United when actually, it's been done for some time.
Yeah, I am finding, as I said just at the end of part 1, I'm finding that surreal almost to see every dropped Arsenal point framed in the context of a supposed title race. I mean, the gap now is 15 points, which is, we've been involved in title races in the last couple of years, and we know this isn't one. That's an enormous gulf at this point in time. And actually, I'm a little bit alarmed at what it might be by the end of the season, given that we have a trip to Anfield to contend with, among other things, between now and the end of the season.
That's where we will have our most pointless win of the season.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. 2-0 win, sort of replication of 89 and all for naught. I'm finding that very, very odd. I mean, I guess they have to... I guess they're in a tricky position, right, where the Premier League... the crucial issues may well be decided in terms of relegation and in terms of the champions. And they're trying to navigate and sell coverage when the stakes are decidedly low.
Yeah.
But we just have to know that as fans, right?
Sure.
As for the Arteta thing, so full disclosure, I've not seen the full interview. I've only seen the last 30 seconds.
Sure.
Or so. It doesn't look great for Mikel, I think. I think anyone who's inclined, because that's what I've seen is what most people will see. Most people won't have watched that interview. They'll just see the clip that goes viral on social media. The people who already don't like Mikel Arteta, it's going to enforce a lot of their biases about him. What I would say is that in my experience of kind of the post-match environment, I'd be interested to know what's happening off camera, because I hear this interviewer gave Mikel quite a hard time and asked some pretty provocative questions. And maybe if you've seen the full interview, you'll be able to affirm that. But he's probably being shuttled between half a dozen different interviews before going into a press conference, all with the sort of background pressure of we've got a flight to catch or a train to catch or a coach to catch, whatever it might be. I don't actually know how Arsenal got back from Manchester yesterday.
They arrived on the train, so I presume they got a train back.
Right. Okay.
Who knows?
So there is kind of an imperative to that. I think it's very possible that he was basically being told, you haven't got time, you've got to go to your next interview, rather than he just stormed out.
Yeah.
I think it's very possible that that's the situation. I don't think he was rude or aggressive to the guy. He basically just said, declined to answer the question.
Yeah, I mean, this is the biggest load of nothing, for me anyway. I think you're right. The people who don't like Arteta will look at that and go, what a
Yeah.
What a bastard. He couldn't even answer the question. The fact is, it was a stupid fucking question. He's come in immediately after a game where his team has not played anywhere near as well as he would want. I know that he is responsible for that ultimately, right? And he would say that himself, that he's responsible for how his team plays. But that doesn't mean he can't be angry or frustrated or pissed off for all kinds of reasons. He's going to be as annoyed about dropping points to this Man United team as we are, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have an interview and it's, coming to an end and he's already walking off, and then he sort of says, look, what about the title race? And it's like, come on, man. What are you really expecting him to say in that situation? What kind of an answer are you expecting him to be able to give in that situation? I know that's his job as an interviewer to ask those questions. But I think we also have to give managers license and players as well license to just sort of say, look, no, I don't want to answer that. If you're asking hard-hitting questions, you have to be prepared for somebody in the heat of the moment. And, as you well know, the post-game schedule and the way managers are and players are pulled from pillar to post, it's not just Sky, because they've got to do Sky, they've got to do BBC, they've got to do Premier League productions, they've got to do the fucking Norwegian guy who's always doing the interviews with Ben White. What's his name? Fjortoft.
Yeah, Fjortoft.
He's hanging around looking for his 2 minutes as well. So there is a pressure to it. I think it's just absolute bollocks. If people want to get annoyed at Mikel Arteta for not answering that question, I think you're getting annoyed at the wrong things.
I know. I mean, that isn't how it's going to play out in the wider football discourse. Just to prepare you all.
He did a very civil and good-natured interview with that very same interviewer before the game.
Yeah.
Right? And then what is the difference in the context of those two interviews? One is pre-game, you're relaxed, you're hopeful, you're optimistic. Second interview, you're pissed off, your team hasn't played well, you feel it's your fault because you're the manager, and then you're asked a really fucking dumb question at the end when you're already on your way out. Come on.
Yeah.
It's just nonsense. It really is.
And actually I think the reason he was pissed off was the question about the number 9. I think that was sort of where I think in his mind he's just absolutely sick of that. Now, it doesn't mean it's not a valid question, but I think for Arteta it was more the frustration of that's not the only issue. It's a big oversimplification to just continually harp on about the number 9. And I think that was his reaction, really. I partly say that because when I said to him, I hadn't seen the Sky interview, and then the press conference, I said to him, do you think this is about more than number 9? And he said, yes, I completely agree. And I was like, he's never said that before. And then later I saw the Sky interview and I was like, oh, that's why.
Thank fuck.
It wasn't about me.
You thought, I've been so insightful here. I've really
I was like, finally, we've got a report. But I tell you one thing he said after the game in the post-match. I thought he was good in the post-match, but we were sort of having this discussion about the low block and what you can do. And he was like, he came back to set pieces in the end. He was like, and that's why set pieces are so important. And we have to be we were really successful with those. And, we need to get back to that. And I understood why he said it, because set pieces have been really invaluable in terms of breaking open games for Arsenal. But at the same time, I kind of felt like, but is that sustainable? Can you really do that? Can you perform at that level on set pieces across the course of a season? I'm not sure it's ever been done.
Maybe not. What about this, though? Can I follow up on that? Because we did have a couple of questions about this, and I think this is a really interesting topic. We had that free kick in the D when Miles Lewis-Skelly was fouled. Yeah. Gary Neville said on Sky, that's simulation. He's been clever there, that's simulation, which I didn't really like, because that's a sort of free kick that gets awarded countless times in every game. And if you're going to call out people for simulation for winning that kind of a free kick, you got to do it for all of them, not just Miles Lewis-Skelly when he wins a free kick in a dangerous position for Arsenal. I think particularly at the moment when it comes to Lewis-Skelly, I think those comments were, that remark was pretty ill-judged from Gary Neville, let me just say. But we had an opportunity to test Manchester United from a dangerous position. We didn't do it. Martin Odegaard's free kick hit the wall, as most of his free kicks seem to do, unfortunately. So we have a few questions on this. All from the Discord. Has a 96. What will it take to get Odegaard off the free kicks in favour of Rice? Clearly, he's the best ball striker in the club. Set-piece delivery is nearly perfect. Surely it's a no-brainer. Silla O says, when Arsenal get a direct free kick, I don't believe any Arsenal fan has a genuine hope it's going to trouble the opposition keeper. Odegaard appears to pull rank with taking these, but Burnley goal aside, his efforts have been quite bad. Do you think it's odd that Declan Rice isn't at the front of the queue to take these on a more broader level, broader level? Tio says, should Arsenal have a free kick specialist or get someone to train those specifically? Arteta says he wants to maximise every aspect of the game. We have scored too few direct free kicks, something to give the team that marginal gain. And that sort of follows on from the set piece comments that you made. We think about corners, we think about that, but our lack of proficiency in those situations, I think, is something that we can most definitely improve.
Yeah, I think we spoke about this recently, didn't we? And I think we've got to give Declan Rice a go. I don't know. I mean, it's underlined by the fact that he then goes on to score a goal from just outside the box, right, in a kind of free kick-esque position, sweeps one into the far corner really beautifully. I think Martin Odegaard, whatever the inverse feeling of the feeling I had when Bruno Fernandes stepped up to take that free kick, that's kind of what I was experiencing in that moment. And it was a great position.
Yeah.
You know, whatever the positioning of the wall, it was a good position. And I didn't really have great confidence that we could offer a threat. Rice was sort of in the conversation with Odegaard about it, but then backed off. Which I found quite odd as well. I was like, at least keep him there for a bit of uncertainty in the goalkeeper's mind. But we didn't do that.
No.
I don't know what to say, really. I think I'd like to see Declan Rice given a go. I agree. He's probably the best option that we have. If he can hit a corner that sweetly, if he can hit a shot in open play that sweetly, we've got to give it a go. What do you think? Yeah,
I think we need to. I like Martin Odegaard, but I think he is a little bit lightweight when it comes to his shooting. There's not a great deal of power, something we've talked about before. I mean, I think, when Saka is back, he's in the conversation to take that free kick as well. But in the absence of that, I think Rice delivers consistently well from corners and from dead ball situations higher up the pitch. So why can't he have a go at free kicks? I think he's more than capable of producing the kind of ball flight that could trouble a goalkeeper far more than Martin Odegaard is.
Yeah, I agree. What about this? Sort of similar theme to what we touched on in part one. It's from DM Straight Vibin. And they say, do you buy into the theory that the players have written off the league? Is the Champions League the only competition that matters at this point?
No, I don't. Are they realistic to know that they're not going to win the league? I think so. But I don't think you can step out on the pitch for Arsenal as a professional footballer and say, well, the league is gone, so we won't try as hard in this game. I don't believe that. Can't believe that. I'm sorry. Is the Champions League the only thing that matters? Well, in terms of what it might deliver at the end of the season in terms of a trophy, it's the last chance at something like that. But I don't think it means the league doesn't matter. I don't think we can look at these last 10 league games and think they don't matter. I think that would be a very, very dangerous attitude. I don't think that's even going to be an option, is it, for Mikel Arteta? Like the idea that he would say to these players, go, don't worry about the league, we'll concentrate on the Champions League. That doesn't seem like the sort of environment that he has tried to create over the last 5 years, where the importance of every game and every performance is hammered home. So, no, I don't buy into that theory at all. But I do think, obviously, if there's any hope of success in this season, it can only come from the Champions League. But that's obvious, no?
Yeah, I don't think there's any sense of sort of giving up necessarily. I do think that if Arsenal... I think when you know deep down that the title is gone, I think it's very difficult for that to not have some impact on performance. Do you know what I mean? Like when that sort of sense of... And we saw the opposite of that in the second half of last season when we had this tremendous momentum, where we were like a runaway train almost and just finding a way to win game after game after game. And I think there might be a kind of extra 1 or 2% that it's difficult to reach when probably the prize isn't there at the end. So. When you can't quite see the light at the end of the tunnel. But I don't think it's as conscious as kind of giving up or throwing it away or anything like that. Here's a question that I know I've just gone back to back, but hey ho.
That's okay.
It's from NKD1414 on Blue Sky, and they say, is finishing second something to be proud of? I know it's not a trophy, but it's better than third, fourth, fifth, and so on.
I don't know that you could convince anybody that we should be proud of a second place finish this season, because I think there is at the heart of all the frustration a sense that, look, Liverpool have been very good. There's no two ways about it. They have been very, very good, and I think they will be deserving champions. But I think from an Arsenal fan perspective, if you ask, have we done everything that we possibly can do to make it difficult for Liverpool, to stay with Liverpool, to keep challenging Liverpool this season? The answer would be no. Therefore, second, obviously, is not terrible. There are 18 other places you can finish in the Premier League that are worse. And it would be, I don't know how to even to frame this. I think Barney Ronay wrote an article in The Guardian, didn't he, about what might be wrong with Arsenal finishing second, like finishing second 3 years in a row. There's consistency, I suppose, but I don't think you can say we should be proud of that, and I don't think... I wouldn't be proud of it in any way. I'd be happy that we finished second and ensured our qualification for the Champions League ahead of some of the teams that are below us. And I mean that, speaking from now, if we were to finish second, I'd be quite happy with finishing second. Is that what I wanted from this season? Is that what I hoped for? Is that what I think we should have been capable of? Not really. I think we haven't done ourselves justice on and off the pitch in the last 12 months, I think we have to recognise that. The club, I'm sure, will recognise that. Mikel Arteta will recognise that. And they have to act accordingly, because the reason expectations were as high as they were was because of what we've done in the previous seasons. This season, as we've said before, has been a regression. And I'll make the point again that it doesn't have to be the end of the world. If you go back a little bit, you can take a step forward to take 2 steps. Hang on. How many steps? You can take 1 step backwards to take 2 steps forward.
Yeah.
Fool me once, shame on whatever. That whole thing. You know what I mean? Yeah. But ultimately this season, however it plays out, even if we finish second, is going to feel underwhelming and disappointing. And that's just how I feel.
Yeah. Look, I think there's something to be said for finishing second. I think it does show a certain consistency of performance. I think that would be different if we were finishing second at the end of a closely fought title race. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think as disappointing, as heartbreaking as that would probably be, I think you could say, wow, we've really competed until May for this league title over 3 consecutive seasons. That is a feat in itself. This season, it feels like a stretch to say that's what we've done.
Yeah, completely.
Now, that said, I think it's really important that we do finish second.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think the mood, if we are overtaken by a Nottingham Forest or a Chelsea, will not be good. I don't consider it especially likely. It's interesting, when you look at like the league table. I'm on the BBC's website, and it has the kind of last 5 games of form for each of those teams. And with the exception of Liverpool, there are a lot of red L's in that chasing group, which is to say there's not a great deal of consistency below Liverpool. I don't really see any of Forest, Chelsea or City. Brighton are actually the form side at the moment, but I don't see any of them putting together like a formidable run. Touch wood.
But
so I think we'll be okay. I think we will finish second probably. My slight worry about it is just that thing of like perception. And maybe I shouldn't, who cares about perception? But I do think that 3 consecutive second place finishes, I'm not sure about this, but I think the only other side to do that in Premier League history are actually Arsenal.
Under Arsene Wenger, I think.
Under Arsene Wenger, yeah. I just worry about it. I worry about us being framed as kind of the nearly men of the Premier League and that becoming a psychological barrier for the team. Yeah. That's all. I'm sure that Mikel Arteta will do everything he can to kind of fight against that. And that's his job. But if you are runners up 3 years in a row, it's very difficult to argue that sort of constitutes some sort of pattern.
That isn't who you are. Yeah. I know what you mean. Yeah. Let me ask you.
Maybe let's finish 3rd or 4th just to get rid of that.
No, let's not. Let's finish 2nd, please. Start winning games again.
When we win the Champions League, that will all go away.
Yeah.
You've got to remember that.
All right, thanks. I had forgotten that we were going to win the Champions League. What about this then? If we are sort of going to broaden it out a bit and talk about, how next season might be a bit better. We haven't spoken about the reported appointment, not yet official appointment of Andrea Berta as the club's new sporting director, which David Ornstein in The Athletic reported over the weekend. The former Atletico Madrid man is going to come in. I'll give you a second or a minute just to sort of give me your thoughts on that, broadly speaking, but a couple of questions about it. Jamie B on the Discord, we know Berta has a big job in the summer, but how important is early business? We need a settled squad in the summer with no international tournament to show ambition to those players we are hoping to convince to stay. And Non-Flying Dutchman says, with the search for a sporting director complete, what do you think the most important task is for him? Is it getting prepared for a big summer transfer window, or would you prefer he prioritises contract renewals for some of our more important players? He's got quite a bit of work to do, this man.
Yeah, there's a big old in tray waiting for him when he starts. Probably in a couple of weeks' time, I should think. It's a really interesting one. And whenever you talk about a sporting director, you will always find conflicting opinions. Mm-hmm. And I think it's kind of the nature of the role in some respects. There is always a bit of... it's quite opaque, isn't it, from the outside to know who does what in a football club. Even Edu, who I think, generally perception of Edu was very positive, but I think it'd be wrong to say it was universally positive, and certainly not throughout the duration of his time at Arsenal. And the way credit was attributed, sometimes to Edu, sometimes to Mikel Arteta. It's difficult. Well, I remember us having chats early on. What do Edu do?
What do Edu do?
Yeah, and it is a role that's quite difficult to pin down. So I'm getting a lot of references from different people about Berta, which are, I'll admit, very mixed. But I'm sort of having to kind of withhold judgment on that because we don't know what it's going to look like. I do think it's quite a significant change for Arsenal. I think it'll bring in a different culture, a different style. He's a very different personality to Edu. Edu, I would say, was very skilled, kind of great soft skills.
Very charming.
Very charming. I think Berta is I'm sure he's very charming. I've never met him. But from what I hear, maybe more direct, maybe a bit more of a natural fit for a Diego Simeone in some ways, stylistically, and maybe a bit more of a similar approach and mindset. I think that will be interesting to see kind of how that plays out. I don't think he's someone who's shy of confrontation or stating his view. I think that's probably important in the role, but could also lead to some conflict. And I think there's probably going to be a period of transition. Like, he's inheriting a department that's not his own. How's he going to feel about that? We saw what happened when Edu came in terms of huge turnover in staff. Will we see similar things at Arsenal? Perhaps, I would say. As for the summer, I'm sure he will have an impact on the summer, but the work for the summer has been going on for some time. We had a question in a minute about Martin Zubimendi. That goes back to last summer. If they end up doing Benjamin Sesko, that again is quite long-standing interest. So I remember Edu's first summer transfer window. I know we had Raul at the time in the role as head of football, but he wasn't that heavily involved as technical director at that point in time.
I don't think he did it. It was probably June-ish when he arrived, though.
That's true. That's true. He arrived later. But anyway, where I'm getting to is to say that I'd like to think that the big strategic decisions about the summer are, if not set in stone, at least heavily penciled. And you'd like to think that that was the case when they made the decision not to sign someone in January, right? That ought to be the case. So I think actually his biggest priority might be those contract renewals. Obviously, he's got to go out and close the deals. That's one thing. And I think that's where you'll be looking to his experience, his stature in European football, his profile. Is that going to carry a weight in those negotiations? I think Arsenal have effectively are hoping that it will. So closing those deals, maybe more so than the talent identification, a lot of which will have already taken place. And then I think, the contract renewals are massive. And they're the kind of sleeping concern, really. Like, if they drag on too long, I think they become a bit of a worrying situation for Arsenal.
I do think there is something to the idea that your summer transfer business can go some way to convincing those players to renew their contract. So if you show ambition early, if you really augment the squad well and bring in top quality players, then it sort of listen, everybody gets excited about every transfer. Even if you're slightly on the fence about it, generally speaking, you want that transfer to work, right? As a fan. Whoever it is, whether it's a player you like, don't like, or whatever, you're sort of like, I want this to work. And I think if you can bring in good players and players who, when you think about what they might bring to the team and how the team can play, let's say, for example, we bring in a couple of players in early June and you're going, actually, I can see how if we do this and then that guy there, that whole low block thing that we've been struggling with, this is a potential solution to that, right? So you start to get excited about those things. And I think the same could be true of players, that if you can demonstrate that ambition in the transfer market, it becomes easier to close those contracts. I think there's probably some selling to do as well. I'm really fascinated to see how Arsenal present Andrea Berta, because Edu was very visible, right, in his role. and we would get interviews with Edu, and you know, you were there when there's a tour, for example, or whatever it might be, that there is a certain level of access to Edu for the guys who work on the Arsenal beat, right? So you have
and Edu enjoyed that.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he was really good at it, and like I said, he's a very charming guy, and you can understand how those conversations from the club's perspective were beneficial to sort of not get the message out, but to sort of provide a bit more context or transparency to the way things were being done, right? I do wonder how Berta is going to be presented, whether that kind of access is something he's willing to provide. Maybe not. Maybe he prefers, to sort of work in the shadows like a silent assassin. But that idea of what is his role, what are his responsibilities, how visible is he going to be, how, I think there is, when you think about January, right, and we've talked about Jason Ado and things like that, and people saying, well, he's to blame because we didn't sign anyone, but ultimately, he's an interim sporting director, and I don't think he had the authority, and that's a problem, as we've talked about. There are issues with that, but when you have somebody who is in that role, they then become directly accountable to the fans, let's say. When a transfer window goes one way or the other way, people can point to that guy and say, well, ultimately, he is in charge of that. In the same way the manager is in charge and responsible for the performance on the pitch that we watch week in, week out. When we don't play very well, ultimately, people will point fingers at the manager. So that guy is there now, or not now, but he will be there. So to what extent is will the club present him as a sort of an accessible figure in the same way that Edu was? I'm really curious to see that.
I think some of it might come down to language at the start. Berta has been working on his English. I genuinely don't know how good it is at this point in time. That will be a factor in terms of like how public he is, you'd imagine, early on. It clearly, must have been good enough to navigate a couple of interviews. So there's got to be a working base there, but whether he's confident to kind of face the media in that way, that's a different thing entirely. Yeah, and also like how willing are the club to kind of foreground him, as you say, as a sort of figurehead? Is he going to be given the same kind of stature and public presence as Mikel Arteta? Yeah. Or is he a guy working into Mikel Arteta? Do you know what I mean? Is he part of the framework supporting Mikel Arteta? That's an interesting question in terms of kind of the structure and working processes of the club. And I think we'll only really discover that over time and over the course of the summer. So as a journalist, apart from my fears that we're now going to see Arsenal transfer news broken exclusively in the Italian media from now on.
Hey, if only there was an Italian kind of guy who was really into transfers and stuff like that.
I know, right?
He would have such an opportunity these days, wouldn't he? He might be able.
But apart from that, as a journalist, I'm genuinely really intrigued to see how it plays out. Like, I do think that the last time that a person came in with such a strong, different identity was probably Raul. Like, a lot of people are saying to me, hiring Berta feels like a very un-Arsenal thing to do. In terms of the fact that, he's coming from another club, another culture, a very specific way of working. They haven't gone for the internal appointment. They've gone for more of a European trader type, close links to agents. It is a change, really, in how Arsenal have been operating. So,
I mean, yeah, is that not maybe a pragmatic decision in that they recognize the difficulty of, let's say, raising the level again via the transfer market is going to be tough. I know we've all got our issues with this season, but generally speaking, Arsenal are a very good team who need to incrementally improve when everybody's fit, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't need major surgery. I don't think. I know this season has been disappointing, but I don't think it needs major surgery. So maybe it is a sort of pragmatic decision about, who can we get in to have access to those kinds of conversations, those kinds of transfers. I mean, I suppose the key difference between Raul and Andrea Berta is that Andrea Berta, although he has a business background, has been very, very hands-on in the footballing aspects of what's gone on at Atletico Madrid, right, in his role as sporting director, whereas Raul was a business guy who was kind of given charge over football without that background,
Certainly, and I don't mean to compare them so much as individuals, but more so that they're coming from another context without that Arsenal association. Even Edu, although he was kind of an unknown in some respects, was known to Arsenal and known to us. And I think ultimately, the club I think it effectively came down to two, really. I think it effectively came down to Berta and Ato, and it was sort of continuity versus change. And the club have chosen change. And off the back of, we're talking about 3 consecutive second-place finishes, I can imagine that there are people at Arsenal kind of agitating, saying, we need to explore every possibility. We need to try everything to make that final step. And maybe a change in approach is what's required. Mm-hmm. We shall see. I'm genuinely really interested. I think it's going to be different. I think the summer may feel a little bit different. I think there'll be a different way of doing things. And yeah, I'm curious to see how this all plays out. And Arsenal have made a hire that is credible. I think that will have been a big factor in their thinking. This idea that Edu, we might have debated Edu's attributes or skills at times, but Edu had a presence, and Edu, when he walks into a room, it meant something. If the phone rings and you pick up and it was Edu, that did carry weight. And I think, unfortunately, for Jason Ato, the club probably felt that that wasn't going to be the case. He was a guy who had not been in the role before, relatively inexperienced. In Berta, you've got someone who's coming from a consistent Champions League club, a club who've won La Liga in his time there, very well known in European football, and who they need to close some big deals for them this summer, some of which are going to be with Spanish clubs. We talked about Martin Zubimendi, Joan Garcia, the goalkeeper, who they'd like from Espanyol. Those are clubs, agents that are very well known to Berta. So in terms of actually, for all the work that's been done getting them to this point, maybe the club feel that he might be able to get them over the line. Yeah, I'm really curious. It should be announced soonish. I expect the contract to be signed this week. So will he be presented to the media, or will it just be done on the quiet, a gradual introduction? Very interested to find out. We'll
see. Of course, we're going to sign Carlos Izquierda as well, who's a left back.
Yes. What have I got?
Do one more, and then we got to get out of here. So
we got to get out of here.
Yeah. If you don't.
Okay. Well, I've talked a bit about Martin Zubimendi. I had this question from Connor. If, as reported, we sign Zubimendi to play the 6 this summer and Rice stays at the 8, can we succeed with Odegaard as our only creative midfielder? The last few months have shown he is not inevitable and can't win games on his own like a De Bruyne, and is more a facilitator like a Bernardo Silva. Do we need to find our De Bruyne to replace Odegaard if we're going to play with 2 6s? Or play Rice at 6 and play Odegaard and a De Bruyne style player moving forward? I mean, there's a lot there, but I think the core thing for me is, if the Zubimendi deal goes ahead, do you think we have enough creativity in a midfield that looks like that?
No, I don't. I think, I would, personal preference would prefer a more creative player in the left 8 position. We've talked about this, about what we would prefer versus what Mikel Arteta prefers in that position. But, I could easily envisage someone like Berta, that kind of a player. I don't mean him exactly, although I would not be averse to that at all. Sorry, Dan, from HLTCO. But, that would be my preference. Somebody with just a little more craft in that area. Then again, I think it might depend on what we do in wide areas. We've got Saka back. We also have to think about, Nwaneri when Saka is back and how we get him into the team as well. Is he somebody who in the long term could play in that left 8 position? Quite possibly. But I think we have to do something about that creative burden resting almost entirely with Martin Odegaard. I don't think it's fair, really. I don't know if that's quite the right way to say it, because it's a job, but I think we ask a lot of him, and when it works great, but when it doesn't work, we don't have any other options, as we talked about earlier on. So I really like Zubimendi, by the way. I think he's a fantastic player. I think he would, in a summer where we're going to lose 2 senior central midfield players, we need to bring somebody in. I think he'd be a fantastic replacement for Partey and for Jorginho. But that wider question of how we get more creativity into the team, if that means Declan Rice is going to play a lot of games at left 8, is, I think is a perfectly valid one. So, yeah, I don't quite know what they're going to do there or how they're going to set up the team. Or maybe there's more of a Rice at 6 and Zubimendi at 6, or a double pivot and you move Odegaard into a sort of a more natural 10 position. I don't know. Who knows if there's a tactical shift coming, but I don't think with just one creative midfielder we have anywhere near enough.
Yeah, I think ideally you want options, don't you? Look, Zubimendi's a great player, and I can see why Arsenal are after him. I don't necessarily think that means the midfield formula should be set in stone. I think there are games where you'll want Zubimendi and Rice on the pitch, and games where you won't need them on the pitch. And I know it might sound perverse at a time when Rice is actually performing at a really good level in that number 8 role. I think he's been one of Arsenal's best players of the last few months. And yet I still have this nagging feeling of like, is this the right use of him? I can't get away from it. And it's partly about him and his ability to break up counterattacks that I just feel we miss sometimes when he's not in that deep role. But it's also about that desire to squeeze in another creator.
Yeah. Do you think there's a connection between the last 10, 15 minutes being as open as they were and moving Rice back into the 6, taking Partey off, etc.? Or was that just a consequence of, that wobble I talked about, that, it's the cause and correlation kind of thing, I guess?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think one of the factors was that I felt for Mikel Merino, who I thought looked pretty weary after about 20 minutes playing up front against United. Like the amount of pressing and shuttle running that he was doing in that position, and then duels, right? I know he didn't win a great deal of them, but going into duels after duel with centre-backs, not central midfielders, is a very different thing. And then in the last 50 minutes of the game, it was like, oh, can you go and play box-to-box midfield, mate? And I sort of felt like it was a lot to ask of him. And I think we saw him look a bit ragged, actually, in that final period.
I think that's fair, actually.
Maybe understandably. But yeah, the Rice thing, I don't know the answer, but I do think there's still a debate to be had there. So yeah, and again, I think it could and perhaps should have an impact on our summer business.
All right. Well, look, we had better leave it there for today. You have to get out of Manchester before all the fans that you've been crowing at come and knock down your hotel door and stuff like that. For those of you who are Patreon members, we will have a podcast about Andrea Berta tomorrow. We're going to record something with Alex Kirkland from the Spanish Football Podcast. So we'll get some more background on him and what we can expect from his role as sporting director, his time at Atletico Madrid and all that. And tomorrow as well, because there's a game tonight, we will round up the the weekend's Premier League action in the 30, myself and Phil Costa. If you'd like to get on board with that, it is patreon.com/Arseblog. There's also a game this week against PSV, which we'll try and look ahead to as well tomorrow. So a lot going on. We'll try and do a little bit of a preview podcast there. It is a bit of a dead rubber, but perhaps a couple of interesting selection decisions for Mikel Arteta to consider. Get some minutes into some other legs. For now, though, we will leave it there. Thanks a million for listening as always. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we will catch you on the next one.
Bye-bye.